You know, it's not like that at all. When Jesus, we read this a few weeks ago, and I'm sure you've heard this story. Here's another familiar story, the story of the prodigal son. You know that story? The father had two sons, and one of them, the younger, said, give me that portion of goods that falleth to me, my inheritance, in other words. And he went and squandered it and wasted it in riotous, wild, partying living. And when he didn't have anything left, a famine arose, and he had to go into the field and feed pigs, and he didn't have anything, and he wanted to eat what the pigs were eating. But then it said when he came to himself, he said, he realized that in my father's house, even the servants have enough to eat. So I will arise and go to my father and say to him, I've sinned against you and against heaven. I'm no more worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your servants. See, he's going to go to his father and humbly ask to be made one of his servants, because at least the servants have something to eat. Now, Jesus is telling this story, and he's making it up. It's a made-up story. These are not real people. This is a made-up story. He's telling it to you to understand how God responds when a sinner turns to him, when we turn to him. And in the story, he says the prodigal son got up out of the pig pen, and when he was heading to the father, it said when he was yet a long way off, the father saw him and ran to meet him, it said. The father is God in that story. The father represents God. And he said the father saw him, and he didn't just sit back in the chair and say, wait for him to get here, and I'll show him a thing or two. I'll put him in the doghouse. He'll be on probation for a while. No, he didn't say that. It said the father ran to meet him and threw his arms around him. Now, Jesus told you that story to let you know what the heart of God is like. He does everything he can to reach out to us. In fact, in this verse, see, God is the first thing we read about. We don't read about us. We read about him. And it says what it says. The first thing it tells us about God is this: for God so loved the people in church on Sunday morning. Oh, no, it didn't say that. The righteous. No. The holy ones. No. Billy Graham and Mother Teresa. No. It says the world. Did I read that right? For God so loved the world. Now, when he says the world, does he mean planet Earth, the globe, the rocks and the trees and the flowers and nothing wrong with any of those things, but that's not what it means. When he says the world, he means the people in the world. That's a metaphor for the people who live in the world. And by using the word world to talk about the object of God's love, it means by that, it doesn't make any distinctions. It means everybody in general. Is that fair for me to define it that way? When it says God so loved the world, that means everybody in the world. Now, you understand that that means that there's a lot, think of it this way, there's a lot of different kinds of people in the world. Wouldn't you agree with that? And some, on a moral scale, there might be some who are better than others. You know, there might be some way over here that are really, you know, good people, what we would call good people. And then there might be some over here who are really what we might call bad people from a human point of view. But you know what? God loves them all alike. Isn't that what it says here? For God so loved the world. Now, I don't say that for you to, you know, look down your nose at the bad people or to look up with adoration of the good people. I say that in that way for you to understand we're probably all here in the middle somewhere. Is that okay to say? You know, you can think of yourself as any side of the scale you want to, but we're included in that, aren't we? So when he says, for God so loved the world, that includes you and me too, doesn't it? Now see, sometimes when I talk to people, because I believe in grace, as you can maybe tell, and I think grace is the most important thing we can understand about the Christian life. Grace means God doing for us what we don't deserve, what we can't do for ourselves. Some people, especially if they've been in church long enough, object to that because they think it's all about them and their work. You know, and then what happens is if you think that your Christian life is all about you and your work, sooner or later you're going to get behind in your work. Or you're going to fall short, or you're going to fail in a big way. So I try to encourage people and talk about the grace of God and the love of God. And sometimes people say to me, well, you don't know what all I've done. And I say, yes, that's right, I don't, but God knows. And it says, for God so loved the world. Now I say that not for you to think about these anonymous people who are talking to me, to think about your own life. He knows everything about you. He knows everything about me. He knows our faults and our flaws that we think are so bad sometimes to disqualify us from having a relationship with God. That eliminate us from consideration perhaps, but it's not true. This is for God so loves the world, meaning you and me, meaning everybody in the world, knowing full well everything about us. In fact, he knows, as I said this before, he knows you better than you know you. You know, in Psalm 103 it said, as a father pitieth his children, so the Lord pity those that fear him. For he remembereth our frame. He knoweth that we are dust. How about that? To kind of put you in a perspective of humility. He knows what we are. He knows how weak and frail we are. And He loves us, you see. And it says, because He loved the world, that love for us motivated God to do something. For God so loved the world, and let's make it personal. Let's just say me. For God so loved me. Think about yourself. That He gave His only begotten Son, meaning Jesus, of course. And when did He give Jesus? He's not referring here to when He was born in Bethlehem. He's talking about when Jesus gave His life on the cross. Jesus Himself said that no one can take my life from me. I give it freely of myself, and I'll take it up again. He said the good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. Jesus is referring, and God here, or in this passage, He's referring to the love of God, motivating Him to give Jesus on the cross. You see, it was necessary. Because He loved us so much, He gave Jesus to take our place and to be punished with all the things that would have been our punishment. Why? So that we would be free from all those things. So we would not have any sense of guilt. Now, when I told you before that when Jesus said, come to me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you'll find rest for your suke, for your souls. Did you know the biggest thing that causes anxiety is a sense of guilt? Now, what Freud said is that we suppress this sense of guilt. Freud thought we got a sense of guilt from the culture, from society. I don't think so. I think it's part of our human nature. We have a moral nature. But what Freud pointed out that's really insightful is we tend to suppress that. But it doesn't stay suppressed. It shows up in all kinds of different ways. But Jesus offers us freedom, complete freedom from guilt, because He doesn't come along and say, well, God will look the other way and He won't get you this time, but maybe you better straighten up or else later He'll get you. He says, here's in essence, I will take on myself the full punishment, so you don't get off the hook. The punishment has already been paid for. You've already done your time. You've already been punished. The punishment is already taken care of. So now there's nothing waiting for you except the love of God. And here He says, God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, because it was necessary. Because God is not only love, but He's also a righteous judge. And righteous judgment had to be made. But here's the good news, it's already been made. What Jesus did is already done. On the cross He said, it is finished. It's already accomplished. You know, one of the major themes in the New Testament is just what God accomplished at the cross. And that's one of the things we don't necessarily focus on or look at enough. But we should think about that. So He gave His only begotten Son. Now, so far, have you noticed? I read down the comma right here. So far, it hasn't mentioned you at all, except as the object of His love. It hasn't told you to do anything. For God so loved the world, this is all about God and His love for us. He gave Jesus on the cross. Now it comes to you. Here's our part. Oh, I'll bet it's going to be hard. I'll bet it's a heavy burden. I'll bet it's a load. No, Jesus said, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Here's what He asks of us. That whosoever, now we said the world means you, whosoever also means you. Whosoever means anybody. Some people think that God looks down from heaven and picks and chooses, and He predestined some to be saved and some to be damned. Well, if that's true, then you couldn't use a word like whosoever. Right? Yes. You couldn't use a word like whosoever. Now, I'll grant you that God is all-knowing and He has foreknowledge, but salvation is universal and available to everyone. He loves the world. Did you notice He said the world? That's universal, isn't it? That means everybody. But here's where it gets specific. That whosoever, meaning defined by whoever it is, that's what's next. Whosoever, knows what it says. Believeth in Him. Now, if you want to know what God's looking for from you and from me and from humanity, it's not a lot of hard work. It's one simple thing. Just one thing. Just one thing. To believe or to trust in or to place all your confidence and your reliance. Whosoever believeth in Him. Who's Him? Jesus. Whoever believeth in Him. The Son that He sent. Whoever puts their faith in Him. Whoever places their confidence in Him. Let me define it a little bit more specifically. What we tend to think in relationship with God is when you're thinking about it's all about me, we tend to put our reliance upon ourselves. What it means to believe in Him is to transfer your confidence from yourself to Him. It's like, I'm not going to expect me to try to make myself right with God. I'm going to trust in Him wholly. I'm going to rely upon Jesus wholly. Now, sometimes it's a little bit disturbing to people. It shouldn't be, but it is, because we have a conscience and we think this way, especially when you want to be right with God, you want to make sure that you've done what you're supposed to do. Sometimes people say, how do I know if I'm